The phone on my desk wouldn't stop vibrating. The screen lit up with a name I knew too well, Mr. Hale. My boss. For a moment, my thumb hovered over the green button. But instead, I let it ring. The low hum of the city outside my apartment window filled the silence. I sat there, staring at the screen until it went dark. My chest tightening with the weight of everything I wasn't ready to face. If I had known the truth earlier. If I had known who he really was. What he was hiding. Maybe I wouldn't have fallen so hard. Maybe I could have kept my heart safe. But it was too late now. I had already crossed the line between respect and love. And tonight, that truth felt heavier than ever. The memory pulls me back to my very first day at Hale and Company. I remember clutching my tote bag a little too tightly. My palms damp with a mix of nerves and excitement. The glass doors slid open. And there he was, standing at the reception desk. Tall. Sharp suit. That kind of confidence you could feel before he even spoke. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice low but clear. Yes, I managed, hoping he couldn't hear my heartbeat. He smiled, just enough to make me feel seen. "Welcome to the team." He extended his hand. And when I shook it, the warmth in his grip lingered longer than it should have. It was only a handshake. But it felt like the start of something I couldn't name yet. The office around us buzzed with phones ringing, keyboards tapping. But in that moment, it felt like he was the only person in the room. It was mid-morning. And I was still learning my way around the office. The endless filing cabinets. The blinking phone lines. The stack of client files I had been told to organize. I tried to balance too many folders at once. And just as I stepped toward my desk, the entire pile slipped from my arms. Papers fanned out across the carpet in a messy wave. Before I could even bend down, I saw polished black shoes step into view. Then a familiar voice, warm but firm. "Careful, Miss Carter. These files have sharper teeth than they look." I looked up. And there he was, crouched beside me. Gathering the papers one by one. His cufflink caught the light as he handed the stack back to me. "Thank you," I whispered. My cheeks warmer than they should have been. He only smiled. A small, unreadable curve of his lips. "No problem. I look after my team." It was such a simple act. But somehow, it stayed with me long after the papers were back in order. By noon, my head was already spinning from trying to remember names, passwords, and the dozens of little rules no one ever wrote down. I was quietly eating my sandwich at my desk, half hoping no one would notice I was alone. Then I heard his voice from behind me. "Miss Carter, you're not eating here, are you?" I turned, startled. He was leaning casually against the edge of my desk. Hands in his pockets. That same unreadable half-smile on his face. I just thought I'd catch up on some work," I said quickly. He tilted his head, as if he could see right through the excuse. "Well, that can wait. Come join us." Before I could argue, he gestured toward a table by the windows, where a few of my new colleagues were already seated. The view from there stretched across the city. bathed in warm midday sunlight. And for the first time that day, I felt like maybe I belonged here. I didn't say much during lunch, but every now and then, I'd catch his eyes meeting mine. A silent exchange I couldn't quite explain. The office had emptied out for the night. The hum of printers and chatter replaced by a calm stillness. I stayed behind, determined to finish the last bit of work on my desk. Through the glass wall of his office, I could see him, head bent over a file. A faint crease between his brows. The desk lamp casting a warm glow over his features. Every so often, he'd push a hand through his hair in quiet frustration. And for reasons I didn't fully understand, I found myself smiling. I knew it was foolish to admire someone like this, to let my mind wander beyond what was professional. But there was something about the way he carried himself. Calm under pressure. Measured in his words. Yet somehow human in the small, unguarded moments. When he finally looked up, our eyes met through the glass. He gave me the smallest nod. And I quickly pretended to be focused on my screen again, hoping he couldn't see the flush creeping into my cheeks. That night, as I walked home under the city lights, I realized I was already thinking about him far too much. The next morning started like any other. A quick coffee from the corner shop. A rush through the revolving doors. And the familiar scent of polished wood and printer ink filling the air. But when I reached my desk, there was already a cup of coffee waiting for me. The steam curled lazily upward. And beside it sat a small note in neat handwriting. Just the way you like it. I froze, my fingers brushing over the warm paper cup. I had never told him how I took my coffee. 2 sugars, a dash of cream. Yet here it was. Exactly right. I glanced toward his office. Through the open door. He was leaning back in his chair, reading over a file as if nothing had happened. When our eyes met, he simply raised an eyebrow, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Before he returned to his work, it was such a small thing, but it didn't feel small to me. For the rest of the day, that single gesture replayed in my mind, like a song I couldn't turn off. It started as a whisper over by the copier. 2 colleagues, Anna from accounts and Greg from marketing, speaking in low voices, leaning a little too close to each other. I wasn't trying to listen, but my desk was only a few steps away. I heard he's seeing someone, Anna murmured, her tone thick with curiosity. Greg smirked. Of course he is. You've seen him, right? A man like that doesn't stay single. I pretended to focus on my screen, but my hands stilled over the keyboard. Anna lowered her voice even further. Some say it's someone outside the company. Others aren't so sure. A quick laugh. A shrug. The conversation moved on. But the words stayed, echoing louder than they should have. For the rest of the afternoon, every time I heard his voice down the hall, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. I didn't even know why it mattered so much. He was my boss. Nothing more. At least, that's what I told myself. The day of the client presentation had arrived, and the office buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that only comes when everything feels like it's on the line. I was at the conference table early, arranging my notes and checking the slides for the 100th time. Then the door opened, and he walked in, calm, composed, as if the whole meeting was just another Tuesday. "Ready?" he asked. And though it was just one word, something in his voice steadied me. We stood side by side as the clients filed in. When it was my turn to speak, my throat tightened, until I felt him glance at me. A small, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. We moved through the presentation like we'd been working together for years. At one point, he leaned slightly closer, his shoulder brushing mine as he whispered, "Great point, run with that." The meeting ended with smiles and handshakes. As we left the room, he placed his hand lightly at the small of my back, just for a moment, guiding me through the door. It was nothing anyone else would notice, but I noticed, and my heart wouldn't let me forget. It was late afternoon, the kind of quiet stretch when the office felt more like a library. Most people had gone for coffee or stepped out for errands. I was at my desk, frowning at the stubborn spreadsheet on my screen, when his voice came from behind me. "Let me take a look." He pulled a chair up beside mine, close enough that I could catch the faint scent of his cologne. Warm, understated, and far too distracting. He leaned forward, his arm brushing against mine as he pointed to a section of numbers. "Here, you've got the formula slightly off." I nodded, but my mind wasn't on the spreadsheet anymore. The space between us seemed to shrink with every passing second. When he reached for the mouse, our fingers grazed. It was nothing. An accident. A fleeting touch. But the warmth of it lingered in my skin, long after he had pulled his hand back. For a brief, dangerous moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like if he hadn't. The meeting with the new client was supposed to be straightforward. We were there to discuss timelines, budgets, the usual checklist of polite business talk. But halfway through, the client's tone shifted. He interrupted me mid-sentence, smirking as if my points were irrelevant. Then came the condescending remark. Something about letting the real decision-makers handle it. My cheeks burned. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, his voice cut through the room, calm, sharp, and unshakable. "Miss Carter is the reason this project exists," he said. His gaze locked on the client. "If you're not willing to listen to her, then you're wasting everyone's time." The room went silent. The client shifted uncomfortably, mumbling an apology. I sat there, half in shock, half in awe. When the meeting ended, he walked beside me back to the office, not saying much, just that quiet, steady presence at my side. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just admiration anymore. It was something deeper. Something I wasn't ready to admit, even to myself. The days began to blend together. But one thing stayed the same. I found myself noticing him more and more. The way he rolled his sleeves when the afternoon sun made the office warm. The way his voice softened when he spoke to the receptionist. The quiet confidence in every decision he made. It was dangerous. This slow pull toward him. I told myself it was just respect for a good leader. But deep down, I knew better. I started thinking about him outside of work. Wondering what he was doing in the evenings. Whether he lived alone. If there was someone waiting for him at home. Sometimes, when I was alone in my apartment, I'd replay little moments in my mind. The coffee he'd brought me. The way he'd defended me in that meeting. The rare, almost secret smiles. And every time, my chest would tighten with the same mix of excitement and fear. Because the more I noticed him, the more I realized he might be the one person I shouldn't be falling for. It was almost midnight when my phone rang. The screen lit up with his name. And for a moment, I wondered if I was dreaming. I hesitated before answering. My voice quiet. "Hello? Miss Carter," he said. His tone low but not cold. "I hope I didn't wake you." "No, I was still up," I lied. Even though I'd been seconds from falling asleep. There was a pause. Not the awkward kind. But the kind that feels like both people are listening for something unspoken. "I just wanted to thank you," he said finally. "For today. You handled yourself well." I noticed. My heart beat faster at those last two words. Noticed. It sounded different coming from him. Before I could think of what to say, he added softly, "Good night, Miss Carter." And the line went dead. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The echo of his voice lingering in the quiet room. I didn't know if it was just a call of gratitude, or the start of something that would change everything. The next morning, the office was buzzing. Not the usual hum of printers and phones, but the low, conspiratorial whispers that seemed to travel faster than email. As I walked past the break room, I caught fragments of a conversation. "He's been seeing her after hours." "You didn't hear it from me." I didn't need to ask who they were talking about. My stomach tightened as I poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to act like I wasn't listening. Then Anna's voice, a little too loud. "Whoever she is, she must be special. He's not exactly the type to mix business with pleasure." I turned away, my pulse quickening. I didn't know if the rumor was about me, but the way people glanced in my direction made me wonder. Back at my desk, I kept my head down, but the words swirled in my mind all day. It wasn't just the gossip that unsettled me. It was the possibility that maybe there was someone else entirely. It was just after 6 p.m. Most of the office had already left, the fading orange light spilling across the rows of empty desks. I was packing my bag when I heard his voice from the doorway. "Miss Carter." I looked up. He was leaning casually against the frame. His tie loosened. His sleeves rolled up. That rare, and of the day version of him I hardly ever saw. Are you in a hurry to get home? He asked. Not really, I said, trying to sound casual. He hesitated for a moment, as if weighing something in his mind. There's a small dinner tonight. A few of us from the firm. Thought you might want to come. The way he said it wasn't commanding, but inviting. A tone I hadn't heard from him before. I hesitated, searching for a reason to say no. But none came. All right, I said softly. His smile was faint, but unmistakable. I'll wait for you downstairs. As he walked away, my heart began to race. I knew this wasn't just about dinner. Something about the way he asked felt different. The restaurant was warm and softly lit, with low music playing under the murmur of conversation. It wasn't crowded, just a handful of well-dressed people scattered across the room. He led me to a corner table where 3 of his colleagues were already seated. They greeted me politely, but I could feel their eyes taking in more than my name. Throughout the evening, he spoke easily with everyone. But every so often, his gaze would drift back to me, noticing if my glass was empty, asking if I'd tried the pasta. Small things, but they made me feel like I was the only one there. At one point, while the others were distracted in conversation, he leaned toward me. Are you all right? I nodded, smiling faintly. It's just a little new for me. His lips curved into that rare, almost secret smile. You're doing fine. It was such a simple reassurance, but the way he said it sent a warmth through me that I couldn't ignore. When the night ended, he walked beside me to the door, holding it open like it was second nature. And in that small, quiet gesture, I felt the line between boss and something more begin to blur. Outside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. And for a moment, we just stood there, neither of us in a hurry to leave. Let me give you a ride, he said, his voice low, almost careful. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I did. Too much. Still, I found myself nodding. All right. The car was quiet except for the hum of the engine. I stared out the window, watching the blur of streetlights, but I could feel his presence beside me. Calm, steady, yet charged with something unspoken. Halfway to my apartment, the rain began. Soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the roof. He glanced at me briefly. You're quiet tonight. I swallowed. Just thinking. He didn't press. Instead, he slowed the car when we reached my building. And for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Thank you for tonight, I said softly. His eyes lingered on mine a fraction longer than necessary. Anytime, Miss Carter. I stepped out into the rain, but the warmth of his gaze followed me all the way upstairs. The next morning, the office felt unusually still. No chatter by the coffee machine. No shuffle of papers from nearby desks. Just the quiet hum of the air conditioning. When I reached my desk, I stopped. There, resting neatly in the center, was a small white box tied with a silver ribbon. No card. No note. I glanced around, but no one seemed to be watching me. With careful fingers, I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside was a fountain pen. Sleek, black, elegant. The kind of thing you didn't just pick up from a stationery store. I turned it in my hand, and that's when I saw the tiny engraving near the clip. My initials. Before I could even process it, a familiar voice came from behind me. Thought it might be more fitting for your work than the one you've been using. I looked up to see him standing there, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable, except for the faintest curve of his lips. I wanted to ask why. Why this gift, why now? But all I managed was, "Thank you." He nodded once and walked away, leaving me with the pen and 1,000 questions I didn't dare speak aloud. It was just after lunch when he appeared at my desk, a folder in hand and that composed look he always wore. "Miss Carter," he said, "do you have a passport?" I blinked at him, unsure if I'd heard right. "Yes, why?" He placed the folder on my desk. "We have a client in Paris who needs face-to-face discussions. I think you're the right person to go with me." Paris. With him. My mind scrambled for something intelligent to say, but all that came out was, "When?" "End of the month," he replied, watching my expression carefully. "It'll be a short trip, 2 nights. I need someone I can trust to handle the details." I nodded slowly, trying to hide the rush of excitement and nerves that swept through me. "Of course. I'd be happy to." "Good." His lips curved ever so slightly before he walked away. I stared at the folder on my desk long after he left, my fingers tracing the edges. It was just business. It had to be. But something deep inside me whispered, maybe it wasn't just business at all. 2 days later, I was in the break room making tea, when Daniel from the design team walked in. He was funny, easy to talk to. The kind of colleague who could make the slowest afternoons feel lighter. We were laughing about something trivial when I felt it. A shift in the air. I glanced toward the doorway. He was standing there. My boss. His expression was calm, too calm. But his eyes lingered on Daniel a second longer than necessary, before shifting to me. "Miss Carter," he said evenly, "I need you in my office when you're free." The words were polite, but there was an edge to them I hadn't heard before. When I stepped into his office a few minutes later, he was already at his desk, flipping through a file as if I wasn't even there. "You seem to get along well with Daniel," he said casually. Without looking up, I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "He's easy to talk to." Finally, his gaze lifted to mine, steady, unreadable. "Just make sure he's not distracting you from your work." It wasn't an order. It wasn't even a warning. But the way he said it sent a strange, warm chill down my spine. The morning of the trip came faster than I expected. The office driver picked us up before sunrise. the streets still quiet under a pale blue sky. At the airport, everything felt strangely surreal. We moved through security and check-in like clockwork. But there was an undercurrent I couldn't name. A quiet tension. As if we were both aware that this wasn't just another work trip. When it was time to board, he paused at the gate and looked at me. "You'll sit by the window," he said. It wasn't a question. On the plane, we didn't talk much. Just the occasional exchange about coffee or the view. But every now and then, I'd catch him looking at me. His expression softer than I'd ever seen in the office. Hours later, as we landed in Paris, the captain's voice announcing our arrival, I realized this was the first time we'd stepped into a world where no one knew us as boss and employee. And somehow, that felt both dangerous and irresistible. The taxi ride from the airport wound through narrow Parisian streets, lined with glowing cafe windows and balconies draped in flowers. The city felt alive in a way I'd only ever seen in movies. When we pulled up to the hotel, I stared up at the grand facade. All marble columns and golden light spilling from tall glass doors. Inside, the air smelled faintly of fresh roses and polished wood. The receptionist greeted us warmly, her French accent smooth and melodic. He handled the check-in with his usual composure. But when she handed him the room keys, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Both rooms were on the same floor, right next to each other. As we stepped into the elevator, he glanced at me. "You'll have a view of the Seine from your room," he said. "It's better than mine, I think." I smiled faintly. But inside, my heart was racing. The way he said it, quiet, almost personal, made the air between us feel heavier. When we reached my door, he handed me my key. "I'll see you in the lobby in an hour for dinner," he said. I nodded, closing the door behind me. Leaning against it, I realized that this trip was going to test every boundary I'd promised myself I wouldn't cross. An hour later, I stepped into the lobby, my heart pounding harder than it should for a simple work dinner. The chandeliers cast a warm glow over the marble floor. And there he was, leaning casually against a column, his black suit perfectly tailored. No tie this time. More relaxed. For a moment, his eyes swept over me, and something unreadable flickered there before he straightened. "You look ready," he said simply. But the pause before the last word felt loaded. We walked through cobbled streets until we reached a quiet restaurant tucked away from the tourist buzz. The host greeted him by name, guiding us to a corner table by the window. The soft hum of French conversation surrounded us, along with the scent of fresh bread and wine. Throughout the meal, our talk drifted far from work. Parisian architecture, books he liked, places I dreamed of visiting. It felt easy, dangerously easy. Halfway through dessert, he leaned in slightly. "You know," he said, "it's nice seeing you away from the office." My breath caught. And for a few seconds, I forgot we were supposed to be colleagues. When the night ended, he didn't rush us back to the hotel. We walked slowly through the quiet streets, the glow of the city wrapping around us like a secret we weren't ready to name. Back at the hotel, I unlocked my door and stepped inside. But the thought of ending the night felt wrong. I slid open the balcony doors, letting the cool Paris air sweep into the room. The Seine shimmered below, its surface catching the glow of the city lights. A soft knock on my door made me turn. When I opened it, he stood there, no jacket now. Just his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, the top button undone. "Couldn't sleep," he said simply. "Mind if I join you?" I nodded, stepping aside. We ended up on the balcony, leaning against the railing, the quiet between us strangely comfortable. "You have a beautiful view," he said after a while. "I was just thinking the same thing," I replied. But my eyes weren't on the river. He glanced at me, and in that moment, the air seemed to shift. A tension that wasn't heavy, but electric. "You're different here," he murmured. "More yourself." I didn't know how to answer that. So I didn't. We just stood there, side by side, listening to the hum of the city below, both aware that something was changing, and neither of us stopping it. The night air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of rain from somewhere far off. We stood in silence, the soft city noises filling the spaces our words didn't dare cross. I felt it before I saw it. The subtle shift of his weight as he turned toward me. When I glanced up, his eyes were already on mine. Steady, searching. As if he was weighing a choice. His hand rested lightly on the railing, inches from mine. I could feel the warmth radiating from him. So close that all it would take was the smallest movement, for our fingers to touch. "You know," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself, "some lines are hard to draw, and even harder to keep." My breath caught. I wasn't sure if he meant work, or this. Us. The moment stretched, taut and fragile, until a distant clap of thunder broke it. He drew in a slow breath, straightening slightly. "I'll see you in the morning," he said. His voice steady again, but softer than usual. When the door closed behind him, I stood there alone on the balcony, wondering if I had just imagined the way his hand had been reaching for mine. Morning came far too quickly. The sky over Paris was pale and hazy, as if the city itself wasn't quite ready to wake. I packed my suitcase slowly, every fold of clothing feeling like the quiet end of something I didn't want to name. At breakfast, we sat across from each other in the hotel dining room. The conversation was polite, but the easy flow from the night before had shifted, as if we were both carefully stepping back inside invisible walls. On the way to the airport, the taxi ride was quiet. He scrolled through his phone. I stared out at the blur of streets. But every now and then, our eyes would meet in the reflection of the window. When we reached the boarding gate, he turned to me. "Good work on the trip," he said, his tone the same as it would be with any colleague. But then, just as I was about to step forward, he added in a lower voice, "I'm glad it was you who came with me." It was nothing. And yet, it was everything. On the flight home, I realized I didn't know where we stood, or if anything had truly changed. But I knew one thing. Paris would never just be a city to me again.